Hi everyone, and welcome back to Mingo's Corner on YouTube. So I haven't got myself into any pickles to fix on my loom this last few weeks. October's a crazy busy month in our town. We get a lot of tourists. There's a lot of hours to be worked at yarn shop and things to be done, so it just didn't happen. But I did end up making a sample this past couple of days, and it got me to thinking about, what is the point of a sample and what are we looking at? So I ended up dragging everything out of my sample box, which is kind of funny because I hadn't realized it was quite this big. The splash screen for the video, and I've probably already inserted a picture into the video here, will show you where I store that stuff, along with the project information sheets that I keep. I just dragged out the critical pieces. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what my samples represent. There's a journey here, and then I'm going to talk specifically about the sample I did most recently. This is chaos, I'll be honest. There's an awful lot here. One of the things I noticed is I have a lot of samples in my bag or in my box of things like this. Early in my weaving, I was just told if you have extra yarn, extra warp, and I wasn't great at calculating my warp lengths and such at that point, I would just weave off a couple of sections of whatever I was doing. This was a pickup stick pattern. I think these were the Savory Towels. Yes, it is a pattern. I'll try to link to the patterns at the end of the video if I can. Some of these are from Little Looms, and this is a very popular and delightful pickup stick pattern. I don't usually weave with DK weight cotton any longer, but these came out really nice. Don't recall what the fate of them was. These kinds of samples are kind of hard for me to keep now though, because first off, I don't really need a sample of pickup sticks. Back when I made this, and some of these are dated, this one's dated February of 2021. So I think I started weaving in September of 2020, which means this is, getting up there as far as age, and also represents kind of the history of what I was doing. A lot of these will have little tags on them, as you can see here, where I've just taken scrapbook tags from my stash and written down some information. This is a sample of, this eventually became a Little Looms project. Don't know that I love the colors necessarily in the quantities I've used them here, but a nice little piece of fabric. I'll probably keep that. I have a plan coming up. Here's another one from that same series. Plan coming up to play with some sewing. This is fairly sturdy. This was 8/4 cotton used doubled. I will probably maybe use this for a sewing project. This was also, I did the, I worked this pattern a couple times. This is Kelly Casanova's Diamond Stripes towel. And I did my first warp with this blue, this is Cotolin, I believe. And then at the end, I just tried some different colors on it. I had seen people use different colors that I liked, so I just threw some on there. Again, this is probably wide enough for a little pouch or something I might work on, so I'll lay that aside as potential fabric. Obviously, at some point, I was playing with lace. One of the things I was trying to find out is what would happen if I used this particular yarn as a weft. I ended up making an entire scarf out of that. Really liked that. I was playing with Brooks Bouquet and lino and all the different things there. But this is a sample. The fabric is not very nice. It's a little sleazy, which is a weaving term. That means that it's just a little too open. It doesn't have quite as much structure as I'd like it to have. So part of that's because of the lace, and part of that is because I don't think it was set tight enough. So yeah, this is probably destined for the trash bin. This was a sample I did prior to, or maybe when I think this is when I was teaching a class on doing inlays of various types, adding things to your weaving. And so just, playing with carrying things through the warp and the weft. One of the things I learned about this is that this little fuzzy, funny yarn here is an add-in that you can buy to use for your knitting. It's called Make It Tweed, and it looks great if you're knitting. In the weaving, it kind of disappeared. I mean, I get a couple of little colored flecks in with the red, but not nearly as flecked as it looks in knitting. So probably not something I'd want to repeat. That's kind of a resource piece now, so I just kind of hang on to that. This was the piece this is the sampler I did when I was taking my multi-shaft loom class. So, we started at the beginning with plain weave and then started doing some twills and different yarns. Again, this is more of a kind of a nostalgia piece. It's the first thing I ever wove on a multi-shaft loom. There are some designs in here I really, really like. So I'm keeping them as ideas. You might see some of this. One or the others of these show up in some rigid heddle stuff coming up in the future. We'll see. This I'm keeping mostly because I just like these colors together. This was 8/4 cotton. This is the diamond striped towels from Kelly Casanova. I wove those several times. And I really did like this color palette. So now we're kind of getting into I'm keeping this because these colors kind of sing for me. And I really think that I would like to do something with this color palette again. Not maybe an 8/4 cotton, but definitely play with that again somehow with something. So I've got a pile over here I'm keeping for colors. Here's another one. This is a sample. I don't even know what happened to these towels, but this was a color palette I pulled together in obviously some autumnal colors with that beautiful blue that's kind of reminiscent of blue skies. And keeping that for the colors. This was actually woven, my notes say, this was woven as a gamp. So a color gamp is just a piece. Usually you would start with like dark value colors like black, charcoal over on this corner, end with white at this corner, and then work the values against each other on warp and weft to create sort of a map, because there are places where the colors look different depending on, what you've woven them over, what colors have been woven together. The intensity of this gold on top of or underneath this orange weft is way more interesting than the same gold with a white weft. So it was a towel, it was a pretty towel, stripes, whatever, but I'm just kind of keeping it for the color reference part of it. This was a sample for little looms. I ended up doing the Danae scarf that was in the winter 2024 issue. And I was very curious to see how the bamboo, this is bamboo 7, and that's bamboo spelled B-A-M-B-U, would play with this is Sunset Malabrigo sock. And I was just kind of curious as to what kind of fabric I would get if I warped it up and used the sock as weft. Then I played with putting inlays into it. I was trying different ideas, beading, trying to make circles in the beading. That came out pretty well until it failed. Different kinds of, how do I like it if the beads are stacked up? What if I beaded just same color beads into the weft? But the main point of this sample, aside from do I like these different motifs, can I create something that works for the submission? Oh, and here was my hem stitch. Was to see how the two yarns played together. And honestly, if there's a reason for people to sample who aren't doing designing, it's, okay, I want to use a yarn I've never used before. What do I need to know? A flat cotton yarn. I don't have a piece of the yarn. Well, you can kind of see it on the edge here. It was a really flat, like a ribbon yarn that was actually made into a commercially purchased sweater. And I wore the sweater for a while, but didn't love it. Didn't fit great, but it was all 100% cotton. So I unraveled the sweater and then wove this swatch with it, wove this with it, and then eventually did something else with it too. So yeah, this was just let's see what the yarn will do if I were to use it in that context. And the same thing with this. My card with this says, the point of this project, of these pieces that are all clipped together here, was to see what would happen if I wet finished a commercial sock yarn with a variety of different wefts. So, there's always this thing about don't mix warps and wefts. Like don't mix cotton and wool in a warp. Don't mix this, that, and the other together because they shrink differently or whatever. What this taught me was you can mix, provided that you're mixing one warp, in this case wool, with a weft. In this case, this is bamboo, this is cotton, this is bamboo, and this is itself, I think. So anyway, I put cotton, I put bamboo, and I put something else in this. And I just wanted to see, okay, if I wet finish these, is it gonna do something weird? And the answer was, well, the bamboo kind of slinkied up a little bit here, but the answer was no. I can put whatever I want on a wool warp, provided that I am consistent with what I put in the warp and consistent with what I put in the weft. Have I broken that rule? More than once. But in general, it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind, that you can do little tests like that for yourself if you've got leftovers. This isn't something you do if you've got a limited amount of a skein. All of these are from doing the weave along. So if you're not familiar with the Acton Creative Weave Alongs, we just wrapped up the one in October, and it was basically, this was the final sample for that. It was using lace. We did sort of a Swedish lace thing with that. But I've done a few weave alongs, and I make a few samples. This was from the honeycomb one from like a year ago. This was the very first one, which was a shadow weave. And a lot of times the idea for these is mostly to see if I'm going to like working them on the rigid heddle, if I have a color idea, if I like the set. I know this is garish. This was actually, the colors were chosen because I had the right weight of yarn, but I didn't have the colors I wanted. So I was seeing what happened if I played with the values, so darks, lights, how does this look? And what this taught me, amongst other things, is that less is more when it came to changing up colors on this. So, you know, this kind of sampling goes into those projects. So the weave alongs don't just happen. This was a very important sample from the weave along because I do the weave alongs with Chris Acton, who is a floor loom weaver. She set her bamboo 7 at ends per inch of 16. This is 15. That's the best I can do with my Ashford because I have a 7.5 dentelle. I don't have an 8. And I'll be honest, I didn't love it. I felt it was too open. I felt like the floats were just too loose. There were a lot of things about this sample I did not care for. Now you can see, this is the sample. It looks like it was pretty short. I probably did a 36-inch sample. One of the things now I do for things like this where I'm trying a new yarn or trying a different set is I make as clear as I can information on here about how I washed it, how I dried it, what was the size before I washed it, what was the size after I washed it, what were my picks per inch before wash, after wash. I'm making a lot of notes. This is more than probably you would care to do unless you were designing something for yourself. This is the set I came up with for the final scarf. And I really did like this. And then I was just playing with colors to see what did I like, what didn't I like, what different motifs did I care to do, how did I feel about the backs, what if I changed the yarns up and did a different yarn. So I've got, this is the bamboo 7 with bamboo 7. This is with cotton 8-2. I think this is bamboo pop. This looks like it might be 8-4. I'm not sure. This is a mercerized cotton. I can tell that might be soft spun in the purple. The other thing though I learned about this sample is bamboo 7 does not wash up well if it's left loose like this. So first note I made about the whole project was we must treat the fringe. You can't leave fringe loose on a project like this and have anything that looks halfway decent. This was all neat and nice and trimmed. It went through one wash cycle, and I think I didn't even dry it in the machine. And I probably dried it flat on the counter. But just the machine of washing did this to this. So definitely not something you want to see, and obviously it happened here too. It's even worse with the set is less tight because there's just not even as much to keep it together there. A couple other things that you can look at when you're looking at samples are things like, okay, these are croak broad samples using a yarn I'd never used for croak broad, using this is a seine twine of some kind, and it went through the washing machine and the dryer. Croak broad is a weft faced weave, meaning you don't see the warp. So one of the things I noticed is I don't like it that I can still see some warp in this particular sample. In this sample, it's a little bit better. I have notes about what I think happened. But then I washed it and dried it, and the first thing I noticed was the red bled. I'm not sure if it's showing up very clearly there, but there's an awful lot of bleed of this red yarn into the white sections. So that's not desirable for something like a rug. made me kind of rethink whether or not I really wanted to do a rug with these yarns. Making the sample and the amount of beading I had to do to make these yarns work made me rethink maybe even doing crook brod for a rug at this time for myself with the tools I have. This is a sample that lied. Now, I will be honest, it didn't lie to me intentionally. I allowed it to lie to me. I did this swatch, and instead of washing, this is for some towels. Actually, you might recognize these towels. This was an early swatch for the Techie towels that were in the winter 2025 little looms. Was kind of in a time crunch. I'd had a death in the family. I was trying to get things done. Things just weren't working well. And let's just say I did not have time to take the swatch and run it through the washer and dryer. So I ran some really hot water in a sink. I put some soap in. I did a quick wash. I agitated a little bit, but I am not a washing machine. And so when it came out and it dried like this, I went, great, this is gonna work. I need to clean up the pattern a little bit, but I think this is gonna be fine. And then the towels themselves went through the washing machine and were an absolute fiasco. So, and I think the reason for that is in the yarn itself. This is an 8/4 cotton. It's a soft 8/4 cotton. This is not Maysville cotton. This is, I believe it's Cloud 9 cotton from Cotton Clouds. There's nothing wrong with it as a cotton 8/4. What was wrong is I was trying to, force it into a twill design. And this is obviously not a standard twill design, because if you know anything about twills are usually sort of diagonals. And I have forced a twill into a square pattern, and the yarns are wanting to roll around a little bit in here because of the roundness of the 8/4. When I redid the towels and doubled 8/2, I got a much better result. So always make sure if you're trying to test a yarn for a project, you actually wash it and dry it the way you intended to wash and dry the final project. So the next sample I did after that was this one for Aztec diamonds, which is in my Etsy shop. There's a weaving mistake here, obviously, but I was just trying out different things. I wanted to see if I could make the pattern work. Would it show up? What colors did I want? What happens if I change the weft? I already kind of was pretty confident. This was a very short, quick wash or warp, but I did put this through the washer and dryer with other towels and washed and dried it just like I would the actual final towels to make sure, having learned from the swatch that lied, which was not too far before this one, that was kind of a key component. So that's the box of swatches in a nutshell. So let's talk specifically about swatches and a specific swatch. I just took this one out of the washing machine today and dryer. This was a new to me yarn. This is Brossard's Bamboo Cotton. It is, as you can see, it's got a nice twist. Because it's bamboo, it kind of has the sheen of mercerized cotton, but it has not been treated like a mercerized cotton has. So it's going to have the absorbency of bamboo, the absorbency of cotton. And so I was curious about some things it would do. So I put it on my loom. I think I put a 40-inch warp on. So this is like a 24-inch piece. There was loom waste, of course. And then I cut this off. And because I have learned, one of the things I do now is if I'm using a new yarn and I have enough, I leave the fringe loose like this just to see how is that going to play? What is it going to do? Is it going to do what this Bamboo 7 did and basically untwist and come apart? Or is it going to kind of hold its own? I would say it kind of held its own. I would not, I'm a big proponent of finishing your fringe somehow anyway. I think fringe looks better if it's twisted or braided or one of any number of ways that you can finish off fringe, but twisting and braiding are my two go-tos. I may do a 4-strand braid. I may do a 3-strand braid. I may twist 2, 4, 6, 8 strands, but I do like to do something with my fringe. So, but this doesn't look bad. What it tells me is if somebody decides that they want to do a pattern that I do and they don't want to mess with their fringe, they may not have to. Now, if you're going to dry this in the dryer and wash it in the washing machine, you're going to get this tangling because that is what happened to my sample. This, I did nothing to this. I haven't even sat here until now and done this. So it is going to tangle a little bit. I obviously was playing with some decorative ideas for hems. This, this was my first attempt at my pattern. Did not work because I really couldn't see the gray weft into the on the green warp. That was the idea. I didn't want them to be like contrasting. I wanted them to be similar values, but just have a little bit of a difference to them. So I pulled out just some 8-2 in, I think this was charcoal, and did 2 strands of 8-2 so I could see how my pattern was set up and whether I was getting my pickup sticks and my heddle rods and all that into place. So I threw this cotton in there mostly so I could see what I was doing, because I was having trouble discerning where the pickups were here. But what I've discovered having done the final wash and wet is I really like the cotton. I like the way that it made the design on the front. I really like the way that it came out on the back with the weft floats. So there's some future with this, the cotton on the bamboo cotton yarn. So cotton 8-2 over the bamboo cotton, I really did like that. And then this was my final project, or not my final project, but my final sample where I finally worked out my motifs, figured out what I wanted to do. So just kind of playing with this idea, I do see some things I don't like in my sample, and obviously this is personal preference. If you were looking at these motifs and you're like, oh, I really wish I had something in the center of each one of these, well, you know, I could figure out how to put another float in there if that was something I wanted to do. In my case, I think I want to take one of the rows out. The one that shows the problem most obviously is this one. For some reason, these 3 rows just compacted a little more tightly underneath the lace than all the rest of them. I think I know why structurally, and I may abandon that row, and these may be smaller diamonds. They're also quite elongated, and I didn't really want them to be quite that long. I was just going for effect. Now I know how to tweak the project. I still have to evaluate what's going on here, and these yellow stripes are for counting, so that was kind of not important. But anyway, so what I'm looking for, before this went into the wash, I do have various kinds of project note sheets, and I think I've talked about this before, but one of the things I do is I write things down. I make notes about, and this design notes is a work in project as far as worksheet goes itself. But anyway, I write down things like how many ends did I put in my warp? I did 86. I did a 40-inch warp. I did things like I measured the width of this project when it was on the loom, the width of this project when it came off the loom, the width of this project after it wet finished. And one of the things that was interesting is when it came off the loom, I was getting about 6.5 inches on the width, and I was getting 10 picks per inch on the weft length, or the weft picks per inch, words. When I wet finished it, it actually became slightly wider. I mean, 1/4 of an inch. But this measured 6.5 when it wasn't wet finished, and now it's measuring 6 3/4. What that tells me is, and it holds up to numbers, is I measured just from end to end. So I measured from this end here all the way to this end here. I didn't measure the individual sections because I wanted to know what the yarn was doing. Wasn't particularly worried about individual pieces. I can kind of get some ideas with the 10 picks per inch. This is also 10. This is pretty close. So the fact that this is cotton and these are the same yarns, the cotton bamboo, it didn't actually shrink up as much. In fact, this cotton section is almost 7 inches, which is interesting because it did not shrink up widthwise. It didn't shrink up lengthwise either. It just seems like it held its own a little differently. That has potential for other uses. But the length overall, I lost 3 inches. So I went from 24.25 inches to 21. So some of my width came from the fact that it just went like this. And when it went like this, it also went like this just a little bit. Which tells me, or tells you if you're working with a project and you're trying to figure out your sizing, okay, I did wash this in the washing machine. I did dry it in the dryer. So this is how I would treat the desired finished project. Just like my towel samples, I would wash it like I was going to do that. And then I know that, okay, if I don't quite have the width I think I want when I'm on the loom, I may get a little more width from the warp when I'm done washing it. And I need to be very careful to weave long enough because 3 inches out of 24.25 is a substantial amount. That's like 1/8. So I'm losing 1/8 of my length through washing and drying with this yarn. So I need to make sure that my project, if I need a project that's 10 inches long when I'm finished, I need to make it, what's an eighth of 10 inches, like 2¼ inches longer? No, that'd be a quarter. I need to make it longer, and I need to do the math and figure that out. That's not the kind of math I do in my head. I have calculators and worksheets for that. But it gives you an idea of where to start. People get confused about how do I figure out how much yarn I need. And when you're just starting, the best way to know what you're doing is to make samples and keep records, write stuff down. Write stuff down on note papers, write stuff down on samples. Again, it's learning what you like, learning what you want to do, and just doing some trial and error. Yeah, yarn's expensive. I understand that, and sometimes that's difficult, but there's a lot of value to be had in just throwing things on the loom and seeing what happens. The best way probably to get good samples is do like I did in the beginning. Throw a few extra inches on if you think you've got the yarn to do it. Just add 5-10 inches to the end of your warp. Make sure you save room for your fringe. Don't make some of the mistakes I made early in the game. And then weave either a sample of what you did so you can remember what that pickup stick project looked like, or try something new, or try a different weft, or try something else. So there are a lot of things though that you can do, and sometimes it's just reassuring to go back and say to myself, okay, my last project didn't work out like I wanted it to, but look, I have a little stack here now of samples of things that did work out, and I understand why they worked out, and I'm going to keep learning as I weave. And that's really the point. Weaving isn't, for most people, or for a lot of people, weaving isn't just about getting the final project. It's the journey. It's the learning curve. It's I'm doing this because I don't know what's going to happen next, or I hope I know what's going to happen next, but I'm excited to see what actually does happen next. So those kinds of things make sampling fun. Those kinds of things make looking through your samples fun. This sample I'm probably going to actually add a tag to later. I'm going to write down things like it shrank more lengthwise, it gained a little width, this was my set, I like this, I didn't like that. Stick it on a tag. I'll be hanging on to this one for a while, partially because I'm going to be using it to refer to going forward, and partially just because it was actually a successful sample in that it taught me several things about a yarn I've never used before, and that was the point. So hopefully this was not too long-winded and you found it useful and kind of interesting. Tell me about your sampling practices. If there's something you're doing in your studio and at your home when you sample or you do things that you think is really useful that people should know about, add it to the comments, because this is something that we're always told we should do, but I think sometimes it's not always clear what we're supposed to be learning from the process when we do the sample. So these are just some of the things that I'm looking at, that I look for. Obviously a lot of mine is done for putting stuff in the Etsy shop and for little looms, but that may not be your goal, and that's okay, but that doesn't negate the fact that sampling can be helpful. So share your ideas, ask your questions, and I will hopefully see you again in the future. If you like what you found here, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much.